Hello everyone, welcome back to the Unbiased Opinion. My name is Colin, and I am alone this week. So typically when I'm alone and I'm doing a solo episode, I like to cover Japanese monster movies. I covered Gappa, Gorgo, Rodan, and this week is going to be no different. I'm going to be talking about Gamera, Guardian of the Universe, which did come out 30 years ago in 1995. I am a lifelong Godzilla fan, but I always did know about Gamera growing up. Now, I didn't really watch the Gamera movies as a kid, but I do remember seeing the VHS cover for Gamera Guardian of the Universe. And in the past couple years, I finally did get around to all the Gamera movies. I started with the Heisei era, and then I finally finished watching the Showa era back in 2022. And I always did want to do a review on the Showa era, but because a lot of those movies, and I will stand by this, a lot of those movies are just terrible. I only like 2 of the 8 Showa era movies, but boy, is the Heisei era for Gamera pretty good. So let's start with Gamera, Guardian of the Universe. What did I think of the movie? Well, I actually really liked it. Now, I should preface this and say that I'm not going to be doing all the other movies in this review. I will spoil what I think about those other movies in the trilogy, and I do think they get better and better. So this movie, as it stands, is a good starting point for Gamera and reintroducing him because his last movie was in 1980. The movie follows some scientists investigating attacks on an island, while another group of scientists discovers what they think is an atoll at sea, which turns out to be Gamera buried within it. As Gauss becomes a fearful threat, the humans have to rely on Gamera to stop it. And that is really the whole movie. This movie in particular isn't the most ambitious with its narrative or even characters. The characters in this movie aren't the strongest. No one really has a personality or any kind of emotional or internal journey. Everyone's role is just to observe, explain, hypothesize. No character really has an arc, and Asagi is probably the closest one to having any semblance of an arc. In the movie, she's a high schooler. Her dad is the guy who's working with the scientists. She gets like a stone that is linked to Gamera, so she becomes physically linked to Gamera because of it. And she feels Gamera's pain, and she physically gets hurt when Gamera gets hurt. And she's obviously very frightened by what's happening to her, and the movie does end with her having a clearer understanding of what Gamera is and his existence, and even her connection to him. It isn't so much of a transformation, let's say, or a transformation of her character arc. It's more of her just going from uncertainty to kind of just accepting it. And maybe you can say that, at least with the characters, is that the movie presents them as professionals. No one's doing anything stupid. They're all thinking logically within their line of work and what they know. So maybe you could say that it's more about how professionals or even the institutions that some people represent respond to something that they don't know how to respond to normally. And it's not so much about memorable or people thinking emotionally. It's all about thinking logically, I feel like, in this movie. And traditional characters that you're looking for in any kind of movie that are memorable or you can really root for are not in this movie. But I will say that this movie, and really what I like about the movie in general, is that it lays the foundation for what is to come. This movie kind of does the dirty work of setting up everything so the sequels can expand upon everything from the characters to even Gamera, and even in scope too. And I want to be clear that I'm not saying that the human characters are terrible. They're not. They're very serviceable to the story that's trying to be told. It's just that if you're looking for kind of characters that you can relate to or almost kind of care about, you're not going to find it in this movie, but at least this movie does the groundwork for you to care about the characters later on in the second and third Gamera movie. At the end of the day, the characters are serviceable, not so much memorable. They do what they have to do, and you're not going to be walking away kind of attached to them. It seems like for a lot of what this movie's trying to do, they didn't figure everything out at the time, but they did figure it out as they were going on with the second and third movie. They just didn't have the confidence, it felt like, for a lot of the things they were trying to do. But that's not necessarily a bad thing. They're figuring it out. They're making it work as they go. But if I have to be a little critical of the movie, a lot of the effect shots are not that good. And I'm not one to criticize how Toho or these Japanese monster movies handle their effects, and I know they have very tight budgets and time constraints, but even comparing it to its contemporaries like Godzilla at the time, a lot of these blue screen shots are pretty rough. But I thought the action in the movie with the monsters was really well done. There's some exciting set pieces. I especially like the part where Gamera first shows up to fight Gauss, and he puts his hand over our characters on the bridge to shield them from Gauss's hypersonic or supersonic beam. To me, I imagine that Gamera is definitely more appealing to kids, and I guess more general people than Godzilla, and this is coming from a lifelong Godzilla fan, is that Gamera has this ability to interact with humans and interact with the characters directly, such as acknowledging them and saving them. While Godzilla is definitely not like that at all, he will acknowledge that there are some humans there, but he won't go out of his way to save individual humans like Gamera. And I think I like that definitely more about Gamera, but Gamera and Godzilla as characters and monsters are entirely different from each other. While I liked the end fight scene with Gamera and Gauss, there are, again, kind of rough shots are intercut with the generally really good monster suit action. Gauss is flying directly in the city. And a very small nitpick I do have with the movie is that it feels like Gamera and Gauss are like 50 feet tall. They look incredibly small in this movie. And this isn't so much a problem that follows Gamera 2 and 3, but in this movie especially, Gauss looks so small in a street that has like 4 lanes. He looks incredibly small. And even Gamera 2 in some shots. The one where he saves the humans from the Gauss attack, the Gauss beam, he looks like he's 50 feet tall. He looks incredibly small. And in the movie, they mention how big Gauss's wingspan is. Gauss has an estimated wingspan of 100 meters. But then that line betrays how small Gauss is. You think Gauss would be large and huge, but it's not. It's very small. And in some shots too, like when Gauss gets hit into the building, Gauss looks incredibly small again. Again, this is a nitpick, but it is something that I did notice and I did find distracting watching it this time around. I didn't really notice it the first time I was watching it. The middle stretch of the movie too gets a little stiff, like they're kind of just checking boxes, but it does pick up at the end. I especially like Shusuke Kaneko's choice of really emphasizing at least scale with these monsters, because later on, 30 years later, modern monster movies like Godzilla x Kong throw scale out the window. But in this one, I like that in almost every shot, there's something in the foreground, like we're constantly looking up to sell to you how big these monsters are. Even if the scale is betrayed later on in the same fight scenes, at least there's that attempt to contextualize how big these monsters are. And I think that's really well done. And Kaneko does use that in the next 2 Gamera movies, and even in Godzilla, Mothra, and King Ghidorah, Giant Monsters All Out Attack. The movie is also pretty kind of fast-paced. It tells you everything you need to know in a logical and coherent way. It's a lot of fun. It moves to the next scene pretty quickly. And I think at least for a 95-minute movie, what more could you want, right? It moves pretty fast. And I think what the movie does really well is that it is a reboot, and they respectfully reboot the source material, and they treat it more seriously with love and respect. And Gamera and Gauss are done incredibly well in this movie. The characters treat it like it's really happening and that they're threats. It's not goofy like the Showa era. They play it pretty straight. Really, up until this point, this is the first Gamera movie that takes Gamera seriously, or the monsters themselves seriously. So that's always good. The movie isn't perfect, but it lays the groundwork for good things to come. It does all the great things in setting up this universe for these characters and these monsters, and it's very well directed by Kaneko's sure eye. The monster fights and the monsters themselves are pretty entertaining and well done. Even if, in this movie at least, the characters are more just observers and they tell you what's happening, I still prefer these characters than what we get in, let's say, the newer MonsterVerse movies. I would take this cast in this particular movie over the human characters in Godzilla vs. Kong, Godzilla x Kong, any day. This is certainly not the greatest Gamera movie. I'd say it's probably the 3rd or 4th. I do think Gamera the Brave is pretty good. But it's the one that took all the steps to make what is to come so great. Like I said earlier, it laid the foundation. They did all the stuff they had to do so the other movies could sprint. This one walked so the other ones could sprint. And even with all that said, I still think it's a really good movie within itself. Sure, there are some things they could have fixed, like maybe refine the characters more. Maybe shoot some of those shots in a different way, because you compare this, and maybe that's the advancement of CGI in 4 years in Japan, but you compare some of these CGI shots in this movie to Gamera 3, and it's night and day how good and how great Gamera 3 looks compared to this. in terms of just digital compositing, digital shots. But overall, I would recommend Gamera Guardian of the Universe. I think it's a very good movie. Maybe not great, but still very good in its own right. It lays the groundwork for what the Heisei Gamera films would become, and it also proves that you can do Gamera seriously and it works. You don't have to always be super goofy like the Showa era. I think it is an essential watch for people who like monster movies. Even if it's not the strongest entry in its own trilogy, it is still a good watch and it is a good time. Definitely check it out if you can. So with all that being said, I don't know what my next episode will be when I have a solo episode. Maybe Gamera 2. I do want to talk about the Mysterians. And I also was thinking about doing Indiana Jones and Temple of Doom. So who knows? But with all that being said, this has been the Unbiased Opinion, where everyone's opinion is biased except ours. I'm Colin, and I will see you next time.